Well, hi everybody and welcome. My name is Neil Seidman, and I'm the co-chair of the Public Education Committee for ADAA. That's the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. And we're just really happy to present this webinar. It's called Mind Over Mood, Practical, Powerful, and Proven Self-Help Strategies for Anxiety and Depression. And our presenter is Dr. Dennis Greenberger. Now we're going to be recording the webinar, so you'll be able to see it again on the ADAA website, probably in about a week or so. You should be listening through your computer speakers. You don't need a telephone connection, and if you dialed in, please hang up and just turn up your computer speakers. So first of all, I'd like to say a little bit about ADAA, the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. ADAA was started back in 1979, and today it's the leading nonprofit organization in the field of anxiety and depression. And our mission is to improve diagnosis and promote the prevention, treatment, and cure of anxiety, depression, and stress-related disorders through education, like this webinar, through practice, and through research. And we work to try to end stigma and to get the word out that these conditions are common, they're real, they're serious, and they're treatable. And I want to invite everybody to visit the ADAA website. It's really a wonderful resource. It's adaa.org. And you can support ADAA by making a charitable donation on the website. Okay, so let's get started. Now, during the webinar, please type in your questions anytime. If you see on the right side of your screen, there's a little Q&A panel, and there's a little field at the bottom of that panel. And when you click in it, you can type your question. Then either hit your Enter key or click the icon. And by the way, only Dr. Greenberger and myself can see your question. So as we go, please feel free to type in a question. Okay, so really happy to introduce our presenter. Dennis Greenberger, PhD, is a clinical psychologist. He's the founder and director of the Anxiety and Depression Center in Newport Beach, California. He's an associate clinical professor at the University of California at Irvine, College of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry. Dr. Greenberger is the co-author with Christine Podesky of Mind Over Mood, and also the Clinician's Guide to Mind Over Mood. Now, Mind Over Mood was awarded the most influential cognitive behavioral therapy book by the prestigious British Association of Cognitive and Behavioral Therapies. Mind Over Mood has sold over 1 million copies in English, and it's been translated into 22 languages. It's one of the most widely read cognitive behavioral therapy books ever written. So let me turn it over now to Dr. Greenberger.
Well, thank you, Neil. It's a pleasure to be here today. I appreciate you and ADA asking me to do the webinar. I'm a longtime member and supporter of ADAA and their mission. I really especially admire ADAA's educational programs and their commitment to promote empirically validated treatments for anxiety and depressive disorders. So the webinar is entitled Practical and Powerful and Proven Self-Help Strategies for Anxiety and Depression. And for a moment, I want to focus on those words. The strategies that I'm going to be talking about today have all been researched and have been shown in rigorous studies to have powerful and significant impact on our moods. The strategies are indeed proven and powerful in that way. Additionally, these methods are often used as part of a comprehensive cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT treatment program, but each strategy in and of itself is practical in that they are really not difficult to understand or implement if you're motivated and persistent. So Neil, I'm trying, okay, see here. Oh, there we go. So all of the strategies actually that we're going to be talking about today are in the second edition of Mind Over Mood, and you can go to that website and get a discount if you're interested in purchasing a copy. So we're going to talk a great deal today about thoughts and behaviors, and much of the research evidence for these interventions has accumulated over the last 40 years or so. However, the ideas as expressed on this slide are really part of wisdom traditions that have been recorded dating back over thousands of years. It's really long been recognized that our thoughts and our views and our perceptions greatly influence our moods and our relationships and the way we feel. And if we're able to alter those thoughts or those behaviors, it can have a pretty dramatic influence on our relationships and our moods and depression and anxiety. So cognitive therapy is really, I want to talk, before we get into the self-help strategies, I want to talk about the foundation on which these self-help strategies are based. I want to talk really about the rationale for why they work. And all of them are based in the broad tradition of cognitive behavioral therapy. And what cognitive behavioral therapy is an active and structured and focused type of psychotherapy, and it's based on the idea that the way we feel or our moods are influenced by our thinking and the way we behave. And as importantly, if we can understand and modify or change our thoughts and our behaviors, or if we can modify or change our relationship to our thoughts and behaviors, that there's a good chance that we can feel better. So I'm going to be talking later on about the difference between modifying and changing the thoughts and behaviors and modifying and changing the relationship to those. So what behaviors are simply things that we do. There are actions. They're things that are observable. They're subject to change. If we could see each other right now, we'd be able to observe and to describe in pretty precise detail what each of us is doing. Thoughts, on the other hand, are really, or cognitions, which is just a fancy word for the way we think and beliefs and attitudes and whatnot. Thoughts are private events. And so we're talking about thoughts or beliefs or perceptions, and this is the way we talk to ourselves or the way we understand experiences, the way that we attach meaning to events that are happening to us. It's the mental monologue or dialogue that's taking place normally privately in the back of our brains, in the back of our minds. Now, there's a particular type of thinking that we call automatic thoughts. And what automatic thoughts are the words or images or memories that come into our mind spontaneously during the day. There's been some recent research that shows that that's fairly consistent, interestingly, that shows that we have 50 to 60,000 thoughts per day.
50? Did you say 50 to 60,000?
50 to 60,000 thoughts per day.
Wow.
Is an average, and that estimate is actually fairly consistent across different research centers. Now, what we are most interested in cognitive therapy, or for our purposes here today, are the particular thoughts that are occurring when we have strong moods. We want to be able to develop the ability to identify and evaluate and alter the automatic thoughts that are present when we have that strong emotional reaction. So we'll be talking in a little bit about self-help strategies that will develop your ability to more consistently identify those words or images that are going through your head. And the thoughts that we're most interested in are what we call hot thoughts, and those are the automatic thoughts which carry the strongest emotional charge. It's similar in some ways to the hot wire in electricity. The hot wire is the one that carries the electrical charge.
How many hot thoughts might we have in a day if we're having 50,000 thoughts altogether?
Oh, gosh. Well, it depends on our level of emotional reactivity. So in a fairly calm state, there might not be hot thoughts that are present. But whenever there is a strong mood, there's going to be a hot thought that's present as well.
I see. So it's very connected with our mood.
Pardon?
So it's very connected with our mood.
Yes, very connected with the mood, absolutely. And what one of the bases is of the kind of self-help strategies that I'm going to be talking about today and cognitive behavior therapy is we can't directly change a mood. We can't do a moodectomy. But what we can do is we can change the psychological events, the cognitions, the thoughts, the behaviors that are associated with those moods. And when we change those, there's a high likelihood that the mood is going to change as well. Now, a deeper level of cognition is what we call assumptions, and those are if-then kinds of statements. It's things like if I start to feel anxiety, then I'll have a panic attack. If I start to feel a panic attack, I'm going to lose control. If I get too close to somebody, I'm going to get hurt. And those kinds of assumptions lead to certain behaviors like avoidance of anxiety-producing situations or avoidance of close relationships. And the deepest level of cognition is what we call core beliefs. And these are our views of ourselves or other people or the world. So when we're depressed, we may have core beliefs about ourselves of I'm no good or I'm unlovable, I'm a failure, nothing good ever happens to me, I'm helpless. When we are anxious, we may have the belief that I'm vulnerable, I'm threatened, the world is dangerous. And these kind of core beliefs greatly influence the thoughts, the automatic thoughts that we have in any given situation. Now, when we're anxious, the beliefs or assumptions, the world is dangerous, I'm vulnerable, bad things can happen to me at any moment. We're always on the alert. We're hypervigilant for something wrong that is about to happen. We have the idea that if we don't worry about every single detail, things could get out of hand. And if we do worry, then we can do something to prevent the danger, which is sometimes accurate and sometimes inaccurate. Now, there's this notion called cognitive specificity, which helps us understand the differences, the idiosyncratic differences between the way we think when we are depressed and the way we think when we are anxious. Now, when we're depressed, our thinking is characterized by negativity in three particular areas. We're negative towards ourselves, or we're self-critical. We're negative about the future. We're pessimistic and hopeless. Or we're negative about ongoing experiences. On the other hand, when we're anxious, our thinking is characterized by themes of danger or vulnerability or threat or the sense that something bad is about to happen. And the thoughts often begin with statements such as, what if, and then fill in the catastrophe. What if I have a panic attack? What if I have a panic attack on the airplane? What if I begin to turn red when I'm talking to somebody? What if I stammer over my words? What if I forget what I'm going to say? What if people judge me negatively? And it's this kind of thinking that is characteristic of anxiety. Now, the reason that I bring this up is that as you become more aware of identifying your thoughts, what we want to do is hone in on the particular hot thoughts that are contributing to your anxiety or to your depression. There's other kinds of thoughts that may be associated with anger or guilt or shame. Anger tends to be characterized by thoughts that people are doing you wrong in some way or not respecting you, where guilt has to do with the notion that you've done something wrong, and shame is not only that you've done something wrong or something wrong has happened to you, but that if people found out about it, they would understand how horrible of a person that you are. Now, the cognitive therapy model is really based on the idea that there's a connection between these four dimensions of our functioning, and it's the dimension of thinking and moods and physical reaction and behaviors. And there's not an idea that one necessarily precedes the other, but simply that there's a reciprocal interaction between these four areas of our functioning. And a reciprocal interaction means that if we change any one of these areas, the other three areas are likely to follow. So the way that this works with depression, as I said, the thinking is I'm no good, no one likes me, I fail at everything I do, nothing will ever get better. There's this negativity that is pervasive with depression. The moods might be depression and irritability and a sense of sadness, while physically there are clear brain chemistry changes, but it also affects us in that it affects our sleeping. We either sleep less or more, we eat more or less, and we become lethargic and tired. The behaviors associated with depression is that we tend to withdraw from other people, we become passive, we don't do things that we used to do, and we don't really participate in things that used to give us a sense of enjoyment or mastery or control. So you're going to see, hopefully, with these self-help strategies, that we're really targeting the thoughts and the behaviors that are associated with the depression in this model. And as we target those, the idea is that the whole system begins to move in a positive direction. So I'm going to start out with talking about 4 self-help strategies that are likely to be most helpful in targeting depression. All of these self-help strategies are in Mind Over Mood, by the way. And the first one is keeping a gratitude list, which I personally do all of these strategies myself and have for several decades, really. But recent research has shown that keeping a gratitude list can lead to greater happiness, lessening of the depression, and an improvement in your overall well-being. Now, gratitude really means thinking about and attending to and being appreciative of experiences and qualities in yourself or other people. The gratitude really provides a pathway towards recognizing and holding on to positive experiences, which is compromised when we're depressed. We may have positive experiences, but we may not have a solid mental container in which to hold on to those. So
I have a question, Dr. Greenberger.
Sure.
If I'm feeling depressed,
yes,
how am I going to be able to think about things that I'm grateful for if I'm having all these negative thoughts?
So what happens for most people, even though they're depressed, it's not that they don't recognize the positive experiences that they're having, it's that they don't hold on to them. So really sitting down for 5 minutes once a week and reviewing your day or reviewing your week, most people, even in fairly severe throes of depression, are able to come up with some experiences that were somewhat positive. So we really process the experience. We just don't always hold on to it. So it provides a way to recognize and hold on to those experiences, which may seem very fleeting when we're depressed.
But if I'm actually writing it down,
very important to write it down.
It's staying with me more.
Alternatively, we can really look back to past experiences that we're grateful for, even if we're depressed now. Most people can find something at some point in their lives that they are appreciative of. So the exercise really helps to develop a mindset that's going to enhance positive moods and minimize negative moods. So focusing on things that we appreciate often results in a shift in perspective from negative to positive. Remember, I was saying earlier that depression thinking is characterized by this pervasive negativity. And developing this attitude of gratitude really doesn't mean that you're ignoring the negative that might be present in your life. It simply means that you're expanding your perspective to see both the positive and the negative. What we've also found with gratitude is that with a gratitude list in particular, we don't want this to be an onerous exercise, meaning we don't want you to feel that you've got to drudge yourself over to the computer or to your gratitude log in order to once again do this exercise. The optimal benefit for most people of doing this gratitude log is once a week for about 10 or 15 minutes. Usually I do it on a Sunday night or on a Monday morning, but just once a week to begin to focus on these kinds of experiences and give you a container in which to hold them. And
boy, that's a huge payoff for a small investment of time.
For a lot of people it is. And I would encourage people to really do these exercises or strategies in an experimental kind of way, meaning don't take my word that it's going to work for you. And in fact, any given exercise may or may not work for you, but you want to use it as an experiment to see if doing this for some period of time does or does not make a difference in your mood. So you want to notice what happens before you do it, and you want to notice how your mood is after you do it for some period of time. And ultimately, what we're trying to do on all of these exercises is to really make a fundamental shift in the way you think, in the way you process experiences that you have, in the way you attach meaning to events, and in the way that you behave. So it's not to just do an exercise 1 or 2 or 3 times, but to really make this fundamental shift that is likely to lead to a more permanent way of feeling better. So the next strategy is, and this is a lot of what Mind Over Mood is about, is learning to identify, evaluate, and alter the thinking that occurs when you're most depressed or when you're most anxious. And this is what we call a thought record, and we really, the best way to learn how to do this is to divide it up into certain component parts. So the first component part that I usually talk about is the first 3 columns that you've got here: situation, moods, and automatic thoughts. And this is a way of keeping a diary of, or a log of, or a recording of difficult experiences that you have, experiences in which you are depressed, extremely depressed, or extremely anxious. And if you think back to that circular cognitive model that I was showing earlier, this is an expansion of that. So this takes the moods. We can put the behaviors in the situation column. The physical functioning is often added into the mood column. And the fourth piece is the automatic thoughts. We want to take a experience that you have that ranges anywhere from 3 seconds to 30 minutes and to really put it under this psychological microscope and to pull apart the component pieces. So we want to understand more clearly what the behavior is, what the moods are, what the thinking is. And we're doing this in order to isolate these component parts so we can more carefully examine the thoughts that you're having in the second half of the thought record. The Cliff Notes version of a thought record when we're depressed is, what am I thinking? Where's the evidence that either supports or doesn't support that particular hot thought? And then based on the evidence, is there another way of thinking about this? So what we're trying to do is to not just to get people who are doing this to think positively, because positive thinking can be as distorted and problematic as negative thinking, but we're trying to get the thinking to be based on certain pieces of evidence and data and experiences in their life. When we're anxious, the 3 questions, the Cliff Notes version of the thought record, is what's the worst that could happen, which is usually the thought that's occurring when we're most anxious, what's the best that could happen, and in all likelihood, what's going to happen. So we want to use these questions in order to break out of the tendency, the rigid tendency, to think in worst-case scenario terms and to try to think of alternative ways of anticipating what's likely to occur.
We have a question that is right on point here that says someone who's trying to do that tool and see, what is realistic that is going to actually happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, how can I really reassess the risks to get a more reality-based point of view but I seem to be having trouble doing that, and everything still seems very scary to me.
Yes. So this is the most difficult part of the thought record, actually, is to be able to gather evidence that will help us to reassess things in a different way. Let me say that the thought record is not necessarily the initial tool of choice for anxiety. So if we don't necessarily want to use it to reassess risk initially, what we want to do is to engage more in behavioral strategies that I'm going to be talking about in just a moment, and then reassess the risks and our ability to cope with the risk. Not only the risks that are out there, but it's reappraising our own ability to cope and deal with the risks that will enable us to move forward in a different way.
So we don't expect to make this huge change just by doing this one little thought record. It's just getting me started in the process.
It's a way of learning to identify the thoughts, and then what we've done with the second edition of Mind Over Mood is that we map or navigate people with different kinds of mood problems through the book differentially based on research and what we know works in what order. So with anxiety, we generally want to develop strategies that I'm going to be talking about pretty soon to manage the anxiety and to move towards the things that are making you anxious. And after we've done those, what we find is that the thinking becomes more flexible, and we become more capable of reappraising risks after we've done the things that we've been avoiding, as opposed to reappraising the risk before we do that.
Got it.
Hopefully that will make sense as I go forward a little bit. But this thought record shows you one of the characters from the book, and I'm not going to read you the thoughts here, but you can read those on your own. And I just want you to notice the negativity. He was a depressed person. I want you to notice the negativity that is characterizing the thinking. And I also want you to notice the pulling apart of the experience. So as he's at home preparing to go to his daughter's home, this is the moods and this is the thinking that's taking place as he's in that moment. And these are the thoughts that are most contributive to his sense of sadness and remorse in that moment. And then once we are able to dissect the actual experience, the second half of the thought record, this may be somewhat of an answer to the previous question, works us through a process of reevaluating the evidence that supports or doesn't support the thought, and then ask the question based on the evidence, based on the experiences that I've had, is there another way of thinking about this? So the next self-help strategy has to do with monitoring your activities. So remember on that circular slide that I showed you earlier, the cognitive behavior therapy model, I was saying that our behaviors when we're depressed are that we tend to withdraw, we tend to not do activities that usually give us a sense of enjoyment, we tend to remain more passive. So if we are able to monitor our activities on an activity schedule and rate our moods as we are doing these certain activities, it's likely to reveal certain patterns or connections between what we're doing and how we feel. So if we rate, say, depression, which is on this activity schedule, between 0 and 100.
With 100 being very depressed?
100 being very depressed, and,
okay.
And the lower the number, the less depressed one is. We're likely to see these patterns. What many people discover is that when they're active and when they're doing things that they enjoy or doing things that are meaningful or give them a sense of competence or mastery, they are likely to feel better. So the activity scheduler is really a tool that you can use to help you schedule events into your week that will help you feel less depressed. And most people find an improvement in their mood after doing this for 1 or 2 weeks. It's very simple exercise, but it can help you overcome the passivity and the lack of motivation that often accompanies depression. And it works on that segment of the circle that I showed earlier that is the behavioral components that are associated with depression. And remember, when we change one piece of the reciprocally interacting model, the other three pieces will change as well. And there actually is some fascinating research that shows changes in brain activity, both the way the brain metabolizes energy and brain chemistry when we alter simply our behavior. The last strategy that I want to talk about today for depression has to do with simple acts of kindness. So again, this is a behavioral strategy. And what recent research has shown is that simple acts of kindness leads to greater happiness and a lessening of negative mood states such as depression. And these findings really have come out of a newer field of psychology called positive psychology, but it also has an impact on negative mood states such as depression. So kind acts really include small behaviors like holding the door open for someone or holding an elevator door for someone who otherwise may miss it, visiting an ill friend, or smiling at a stranger. It can be larger acts of kindness as well. But when we do these things, we tend to feel better about ourselves, and we tend to be more positively connected to other people. Before I move on to some anxiety strategies, I simply want to recount these 4 activities for depression. They're the gratitude logs, which was self-help activity number 1. It was thought records for identifying, evaluating, and altering the thinking. It was activity scheduling, and number 4 was acts of kindness. And just as one aside, the thought records do require kind of patience and putting time in to develop that skill. I'm sorry, Neil, did I interrupt you?
Yeah, no, not at all. Just before you move on, we had a good question about depression. A man who's had bipolar and done a lot of therapy and done a lot of CBT, identified a lot of the core beliefs. And he says when he looks at the evidence that supports his negative view, he finds a lot of evidence that seems to support it.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't seem to be able to change his thinking.
Yes, so the evidence often is easier to locate in column number 4, which is the evidence that supports the thought, and it's really column number 5, which is where's the evidence that suggests that thought may not be entirely true or 100% true, that is always the more difficult one to develop. So we're not saying that there's not evidence in column number 4, but we really want to develop the ability in column number 5. And we do, I don't have the page number in the book that really is a list of questions, but in Mind Over Mood, there's a list of questions that will help people to more effectively look for evidence that suggests that may not be 100% true.
And the gratitude list might be a part of that.
Gratitude might be a part of that. The other thing I want to say, though, is that we're not saying that the automatic thoughts are necessarily wrong or false. They might be. There might be another way of thinking about it, but there may also, what we may find is that we actually need to solve a problem. You know, if the thought records don't really change every bad situation, it may be that we actually need to change something in our lives. For example, this will be an extreme example, but if somebody is being physically abused in a relationship, it's not that we want to think about it differently. We want to take action to get out of the relationship. So it's not that a change in thought is the answer to every question. It may identify an actual problem that we need to alter. So that being said, the evidence to suggest the thought is not 100% true is usually the most difficult column to fill out and will require the most time. But if you can find that list of questions, or you can email me and I'm happy to send it to you, that should be a list of questions that you can go through that will help you develop evidence that will lead you to having either a more balanced point of view or an alternative point of view altogether. Now, for anxiety, the CBT model is identical, and identical in the sense that there's a reciprocal relationship between our thinking and our moods and our behaviors and our physical functioning. What's different is the content of our thoughts. As I said earlier, these tend to be characterized by a sense of vulnerability or a sense of danger, a sense that something bad is going to happen, and the thoughts often begin with what if. The moods are obviously different. There's a sense of nervousness or anxiety or a panicky sensation. Physically, instead of feeling lethargic and passive, there's an activation of what we call the autonomic nervous system. So it's a rapid heartbeat, it's a dry mouth, it's sweating not due to the heat, brain chemistry changes, and anxiety is almost always associated with avoidance. It limits our activities, it imprisons us, and or we look for safety behaviors. We look for things to calm us down, such as staying close to home or being with somebody who we think can help us, or seeking reassurance from other people. Now, some of the strategies that one might use in this situation include mindfulness, which is really doing one thing at a time and paying full attention to what you're doing at that moment. This is being mindful or fully present, and it's not as easy as it may sound. We spend so much of our time thinking about the past or fearing the future or narrating our ongoing experience. Really the easiest way to begin a mindfulness exercise is to take a long, slow, deep breath in and putting all of your attention into your breath. If you can focus your full attention on your breathing and take 2 or 3 more really slow or calm breaths. And as you're doing that, you want to observe the coolness or the warmth of the air of your breath in your mouth or in your nose. You can, if you're sitting upright or lying on the floor, you can notice your chest rising and falling, and you may notice a sense of relaxation or calmness that grows in your body. And during this, it's very, very normal to have your mind wander during this type of exercise. And when this happens, you just want to non-judgmentally observe it and gently bring your attention back to your breathing. The wandering mind is likely to happen a lot, and each time it happens, it's really an opportunity to begin again, and this strengthens your ability to focus your attention where you choose to focus it. So in addition to breathing, you can practice mindfulness with eating or drinking or walking or lecturing or conversing or almost any other activity that you engage in. And it's a lifelong practice that the benefits will radiate into every corner of your life, not only helping you with dealing with anxiety. Now, acceptance is really thought of as an embracing of thoughts or moods or physical reactions that are unpleasant. And it's an alternative to avoiding those experiences. So remember I was talking earlier about avoidance being associated with almost all of the anxiety disorders. So acceptance is acceptance of an uncomfortable experience is really not necessarily an end in and of itself, but it's used to move in the direction of doing something that is important to you, something that you value. And we can learn really to experience the discomfort without having that discomfort imprison us or make us avoid doing something that's important to us. We don't need to feel totally unanxious in order to do things that we want to do or do things that are meaningful and important to us. finally, we have things like meditation or mindful breathing and progressive muscle relaxation. Meditation is really similar to mindfulness and often begins with sitting upright in a chair with your eyes closed. And you'll generally want to sit tall and erect with your shoulders back and your back straight and try to sit still. You can concentrate on your breathing or a sound or an image. And what you choose to concentrate on is really less important than your ability to keep your mind focused. There's progressive muscle relaxation. And with progressive muscle relaxation, you can learn to alternatively tense and relax the major muscle groups in your body. And the process can move from your head to your feet or from your feet to your head. And as you go through this process, it's important to notice the difference between the tenseness and the relaxation. So for many people, relaxation feels warmer and heavier. For some people, it feels warmer. For some people, heavier. For some people, vice versa. But the more you practice this, the more you'll be able to rapidly create a sense of relaxation in your daily life. Because many people really need guided instruction to get them going in a regular practice with these exercises. You can follow the instructions on number 5 here, which will take you to my website and the particular page on the website, which has 60 or so free guided mindfulness, meditative, or relaxation strategies. Like I said, they're all free, and they can be played directly from your computer or can be downloaded into your phone or your iPad. And you can, what I do at home or in the office is I put some headphones on, and I have it walk me through whatever the exercise is. And what I like about them is that they're all tell you how long they are. So if you just have 5 or 10 minutes, you can do one of the shorter ones. And if you've got more time available and one of the others looks interesting to you, you can try one of the longer ones. But I highly...
So this is the website anxietyanddepressioncenter.com.
Yes. Yeah, and I highly encourage you, if you've not done these before, to to be able to walk through it with one of the guided meditative or mindfulness or progressive muscle relaxation kind of exercises.
So will people be able to find that from that homepage?
Yes. So if go to anxietyanddepressioncenter.com, and then you'll see one of the tabs on the top says Center Resources, and if you click on that, then the drop-down menu will take you to the tab that says Links. And if you click on there, what I've done is collate other resources on the web that offer this for free. So most of them are from major universities. And in each of the ones, each of the links, there's probably 10 or 20 or even more individual ones that you can do. So it's a wonderful resource if you want to begin to practice with these and develop these kinds of skills or strategies.
Sounds like a great way for people to get started with us.
It's a great way of learning to develop these skills, a great way to begin to practice on your own, a great way of utilizing guided self-help, and it is very difficult for me, at least, to go through these and not feel relaxed and not feel much less anxious and not have a change in perspective. So the last anxiety self-help strategy is overcoming avoidance. So as I said several times, avoidant behavior or not doing things that makes us anxious is almost always associated with anxiety. We have a natural tendency to avoid things that we're fearful of, and what this exercise allows you to do is make a hierarchy of situations that you're fearful of. So we initially have you just brainstorm all of the things that you can think of that you're avoiding or that make you anxious, and then we have you rank order them from the things that you're most anxious of to the things that you're least anxious of, and put them in a hierarchy. And so utilizing the tools that we've already previously talked about, all of these other tools, we then begin to approach the situations that you're avoiding, hopefully with a sense of confidence and capability that you've got the ability to deal with it much better than you did before you developed those tools. So utilizing the relaxation strategies or utilizing your ability to accept uncomfortable feelings, utilizing your mindfulness skills, you hopefully will be able to do these activities that you may have been avoiding up until this point. So normally we want you to start at the very bottom, the thing that would be creates the least amount of anxiety, or begin somewhere on the list in which you're likely to have a success experience. What will happen is, for most people, that your anxiety may in fact increase as you begin to approach the rungs on the fear ladder, but that's actually a good sign that you're beginning to face your fear. And that becomes kind of the moment of truth where you can either choose to back away or hang in there and deal with it for a little bit longer than you maybe would have before you had developed these skills. So the fact that you're a little anxious when you're doing this potentially is a good sign that you're on the right track. And like I said, you can use these skills that we talked about as you develop them to manage your anxiety as you move up the rungs on the fear ladder. Okay, so we wanted to leave about 10 or 15 minutes for questions, and I think we are right on schedule.
Great. So we've got a number of questions. So we have one question about anxiety, and when you were talking about acceptance, am I supposed to just accept feeling anxious?
So that is yes, that definitely is a strategy. If you think of anxiety on a continuum from 0 to 100, and say you're at a level of 50 or 60, what the treatment for anxiety and what these self-help strategies are suggesting is that you can do two things. You can learn strategies of managing and reducing the anxiety, like the relaxation, the progressive muscle relaxation, the meditation, and whatnot. And what we do is exposure therapy, which means that we can increase the anxiety, and you can accept the anxiety and not do anything to the anxiety. So you can utilize both strategies, really. We want you to be in the situation understanding that it's okay to experience the anxiety. The anxiety is not going to last forever, but we also want you to have a sense of comfort and confidence and sense that you can utilize some of these anxiety management strategies to contain or control the anxiety as well.
And that might make me more willing to do the activity if I have some of these skills.
Yes, exactly. So I think that the anxiety management strategies are useful to the degree that they allow the acceptance and the exposure to work.
Okay. Here's a great question about depression. When the individual is too depressed to even do a worksheet and even fill out a form,
yes,
and doesn't want to take medication,
yes,
any tips? I know that it's probably the answer is very individual, but anything that comes to mind that might be helpful for a family member or a counselor to suggest?
Yes. So generally speaking, the more severe the depression, the more important it is to start with behavioral strategies. So what that may look like is simply getting up out of bed.
So just a small step.
Absolutely. It's very small steps, and the thought record or identifying, evaluating, and altering the thinking really takes a certain amount of energy and concentration. So if the depression is more severe than that, we want to focus on very, very small steps, such as getting up out of bed or taking care of personal hygiene or beginning to eat meals on a regular basis, or taking a walk around the block. So it's working on the activity scheduler that I had described earlier. And at whatever level one is at, it's simply doing things to create activity, to overcome the proclivity to do nothing or to do very little when we're depressed, and to become more active rather than to become more passive. So that, my suggestion is to start with these small behavioral strategies. In terms of the medication, I think that it is important to perhaps talk to a psychiatrist or a family doctor and really review the advantages and disadvantages. Sometimes there are cognitions or thoughts that people have that interfere with taking the medication. So you want to really check out the accuracy of those thoughts. So if it were me, I'd really want to understand the decision to not take the medication. And there might be legitimate reasons, and there might be some really misperception of the medication that could be very helpful. And if it's a misperception, then sometimes providing information may move the person in the right direction.
Great. Well, here's another really great question. So this is an individual situation where the individual has obsessive-compulsive disorder and major depression, and has done the CBT for obsessive-compulsive disorder in some intensive programs without seeing good results. And so there's not a comment here about what the individual is doing in terms of medication. But the question is it possible that maybe CBT isn't the right treatment for me? Absolutely. So this is not necessarily a panacea. This does not necessarily work 100% of the time. So it may very well not be the treatment. Sometimes timing is very important in terms of when it's provided in a person's life and a person's readiness to change. Sometimes it's just not the treatment, and so it may be that some alternative is needed. Sounds like this is a very motivated individual. Do you have any tips that, off the top of your head, as to what resources this person might want to? So I think that what I would normally do is refer back to the treating psychiatrist or therapist and really get a sense from the psychiatrist or a therapist about why the treatment didn't work, and understand, was it really an abject failure, or were there places of some improvement? Why did some areas improve and some areas not improve? There's really a way, I think, of understanding treatment failure, if we pull it apart, that may lead to some clues about what alternative we can try. But I think without knowing specifics of what how to pull apart the failure, it's hard to make a suggestion of how to move forward. But in terms of obsessive-compulsive disorder, I'm not sure, other than medications or a different medication or exposure therapy, what might be an alternative to treatment. There are different levels of treatment, but it sounds like he was pretty intensively involved in treatment already. So there's outpatient treatment, there's intensive day programs, there's hospital-based programs, and assuming he's going through all that intensive treatment, then you really have to pull apart the person's understanding of why it failed, as well as the treating team's sense of why it failed. Okay, good. So we had some questions about the website for the book, so I just pulled up that slide. Unfortunately, that's not a hot link, so everyone has to actually copy that URL to get to that web page. Let's see. Okay, so here we have a question. Looks like one of your readers. He says the new version of Mind Over Mood incorporates acceptance and commitment therapy. And what prompted this new resource? And how is Mind Over Mood different from acceptance and commitment therapy?
So I think that when we wrote the first edition of Mind Over Mood, there was not some of the newer developments in cognitive behavior therapy, and some of the newer developments are mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy. The field of positive psychology was not present. And so what we've done is try to incorporate developments in the field of psychology and developments in the field of CBT that have occurred in the 20 years between the first edition and the second edition. And I think that a lot of clinicians really pull together from different CBT traditions. And I like to think of CBT as really a tree with different branches. And each of the different branches addresses some other component that may or may not be helpful for a particular patient. So what we've done is really try to incorporate all of the new traditions that have developed in CBT and put them together in one resource. So I think that I'd like to think of it as really a comprehensive CBT book that incorporates the very best of what CBT has to offer, rather than simply an acceptance and commitment book, or simply a DBT book, or simply a Becky and CBT kind of book. I think when we do that, we tend to be more confining, and I think that those ideas have a certain value research-wise, but in terms of clinical utility, Mind Over Mood is really a book that hopefully will have clinical utility for readers as well as for therapists. So we try to incorporate the best of all worlds.
One of our participants is asking how they would get in touch with you. Is there a way of emailing you from your website?
There's not, but you can simply email me at dgreenberger@anxietyanddepressioncenter.com.
So D. Greenberger
at anxietyanddepressioncenter.com.
Okay.
And I'd be happy to answer any and all emails.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Greenberger. And I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to all the questions. I want to thank everybody for attending. And please let friends and family know about our webinar series. And the webinar will be available soon, maybe in a week or so, on the ADAA website. So bye for now, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you.